Presentation.
Hello, and welcome to the webinar today on cybersecurity skills, a framework that works. So we have an amazing panel with us today, and I'm excited about it. I know a little bit about cybersecurity, but I know over the next hour, I'm going to learn a lot more. To start off with, my name is Tim Surowitz. I'll be the MC today. I'm the VP of Education for the Linux Foundation. And as much as I might know, compared to some of the folks on this call, it's really not that much. So join us as we talk about this. Let me give the chance for the panelists to introduce themselves. Let's just kind of go with the list that Zoom shows me. So Clyde, would you give us a quick intro?
Sure, thanks, Tim. My name is Clyde Prasad. I head up the education team at the Linux Foundation. And we have been working hard trying to figure out ways to make it easy for people to discover, access, and upskill on open source technologies and on security technologies more broadly. And so, like Tim, I'm not the specialist, so I'm eager to hand it off to the other folks who very much are.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Jamie, would you go next, please?
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for inviting me to today's webinar. I'm Jamie Thomas. I'm a general manager at IBM, and one of my responsibilities is enterprise security, and that includes the CISO office, cyber operations, and ensuring all of our products and offerings are secure for our clients.
Great. Arun, would you go next, please?
Absolutely. Tim, thank you for having me here. My name is Arun. I run the developer programs at Intel. I'm also Intel's rep on the governing board and the second time as a governing board chair. So super happy to be here.
Sounds good. We're glad to have you as well. And then Krobe.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I'm Krobe. I do security stuff on the internet. My day job is I am the chief security architect for the Open Source Security Foundation, where I get to collaborate with amazing partners like Jamie and Arun and trying to help improve the security posture of open source and the software supply chain for everybody.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, we have some poll questions that are going to pop up throughout the session. Let's start off with our first one, and I'll talk a little bit while that pops up on the screen. So go ahead, as you're attending, please click on something, give it about a minute, and then we'll get into some more details. So cybersecurity, of course, really has become everybody's job to some extent. So as we talk about our current roles here, everybody has something to do with cybersecurity. If I guess if you use a computer, if you've somehow managed to avoid that, then it may not be a core feature. Let me know how you did that, by the way. So looking forward to hearing more about all of this with the various staff. We all have different roles. And with the cybersecurity framework is quite neat in that it really is quite broad. It's not just I'm in cybersecurity. It's meant to be wide range. And looking forward to talking more about that. We've given people a chance to click on that. Perhaps we can see the results from that, and then that will kick off some of our conversation. Okay, that's about what I figured would be the replies. A little heavy on DevOps, but for the Linux Foundation, that's not a surprise in any way. Of course, I was hoping that it'd be at least 50% CISO security executives, because of course that's from the geniuses. All things are learned. So that's where we're kind of starting. So I have my own questions to ask as well. So Arun and Jamie, let me ask you this. As in your world, you're exposed to a lot of cybersecurity. How do you figure out which are the skills that you need? How do you say this one's a critical one? You have to have it to this level. So what is important and how much of it do you have to know for the various roles that you work with? Arun, would you start off and let us know how that works for you?
I certainly can. Yeah, so I mean, when we look at security at Intel, there are different things that we look at. We look at, first of all, as a team structure and a team model, because cyber needs to run 24 by 7. It's not a 9 to 5 job. So we look at make sure that people are hired across the three different geos so that we can follow the Sun model. So that's an important element. Then when we look at sort of the team structure, we look at agile persistent teams and we call it as a T model. So you can be an expert in your domain, but we have to be able to identify, detect, and protect. Then for the individuals, we look at it that certification is super important, that 95 to 99% is our target, that these security managers, security practitioners, they all need to certify. That we are not there yet, but that remains our goal. We are close to that goal. So that security certification is super important. Then on the skill side of it, what we look at it is in a business side of it, 99% of the business is automated. So really how do we identify the advanced persistent threat and anomalies? How do we do that investigative nature? And finally, ask the 5 whys. So if anything happens in terms of a security breach, we trust, but we verify. Ask the question, why did this happen? And where did this break? And why, and why, and why, until we get to the root cause. So really intense culture across the company in terms of we identify, and then the associated cybersecurity skills that need to match to complement that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Jamie, how about with your organization?
Well, we're a very large organization, obviously, because we're covering the landscape of cyber operations, but then within the product domain, software, hardware, and services. I'll start a little bit with cyber operations because it's kind of the nerve center, if you will, for being the best practices organization across the broader IBM team. And cyber operations, we really look intently at skills, but we have to be agile because the landscape is always changing. So we're looking at a dichotomy of threat identification, threat hunting, vulnerability management. We call the patching team, which we call the patch police right now because we don't have a better terminology for that. The team that actually is monitoring our tools that are really mission critical every day, and a number of other dimensions. And one of those other dimensions is we have these ambassadors to the various units. And these ambassadors are really charged with ensuring that the product delivery teams are adhering to the security policy and looking at the skills they need to meet the outcomes for the client. And that, of course, landscape, I think, gets a little bit more complicated and tied into some of the framework recommendations that you all are making about different roles and software delivery in particular. Of course, we have to look at hardware delivery as well. But what are some of the dimensions of skills that each of the delivery teams need to think about in order to get their job done and to achieve the right outcomes?
Sounds good. I liked how you mentioned threat modeling. A lot of people see cybersecurity as some sort of compliance checklist. Well, I covered the checklist, so we're good. Of course, the bad actors know the same checklist, so it's not the obvious one. It's the thinking of the unique or novel attack as well. So good. It's great to hear that you've really thought this out, of course. So Krob, I have a question for you. You're obviously incredibly important in the OpenSSF area and the community. What are you seeing or hearing from the people that you speak to, and what are the pain points that you're experiencing with OpenSSF?
Yeah. Well, I'm very fortunate that we have an amazing community that I get to collaborate with. And I'm just one voice of many, and I get to help cheerlead everybody on. But from our community, and this has been something for the last 30 years or so of my career, we have been concerned about as a cybersecurity practitioner, is that we've not seen the emphasis on education and training and certification, giving people the current and correct skills so that they can help enable the business to move forward safely. Whether you're an operations person working in a SOC, like a blue team defender, or you're a threat hunter, or you're like within, like as Jamie mentioned, like a product team where you're thinking about creating something to give to the world, and you need to take steps to protect it. So what I'm hearing, and what really drew me into collaborating with Clyde and the team on this, is we need to bring these concrete daily foundational skills to people, and every role has something to contribute to security. It's some people say it sarcastically, but I have always believed this, that security really is everybody's job. Some people have a title of security in their role, but everybody from the janitor to the CEO, you have some responsibility to help protect your organization and your customers and your ecosystem. So that's why everybody I'm talk with has really cried out for, do we have some means with which to give our new developers or our new engineers, like, or people transitioning careers, how do we give them a roadmap and, concrete actions that they can take to improve themselves so they can help, support this team sport?
That makes sense.
Krob, you bring up a very good point. It reminds me of a statement: dance like nobody is watching, secure like everybody is watching. I think it is everybody's job. You're right.
That should be a t-shirt. I think we should start that. That should be our next
I could make
conference
that up.
t-shirt right there. There'll be a lot of dancing, which nobody wants to see. But no, it makes sense. Having because we just talked about threat modeling, it's tough to know what is the threat saying. Oh, be secure. Oh, well, thanks. That's helpful. What does that actually mean? And that kind of leads me to my next question. So, Clyde, how did you start recognizing this need? And how did you do your research that led to this framework to help organizations like the ones here and others with the rather large challenge of where do I get started and what do I need to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been listening to the community of practitioners. And I think it's very much a function of the crawl, walk, run model, right? Over the past decade, we've all become increasingly aware of the amount of attack surface on our infrastructure and the increasing importance. And there's this interesting, like, element of security in general, where it is both a function and a competency. And I think if I look at the arc as we've gone through the crawl phase, I think it may be fair to say we're collectively in the walk phase. There's been a lot of focus on the function, the people in cybersecurity roles, which is kind of the obvious place to start, right? Is the folks sort of guarding the gate. I think the challenge for this next phase is we go as we try to get to run is what about the people who it's not their function, it's their competency. So it's the database administrator, it's a person thinking about networking infrastructure, it's a person like Jamie said, designing solutions for clients. And that's where it gets tricky. And when we hear from folks is, I really know I should do more, but gosh, where to start? And I already have my OKRs and nobody's really holding me accountable. So I feel like, if I had time, I would. And part of the challenge is that you hear when you speak to people is, I know I should, I can't get to it. And what that really kind of called out for is how do we make it easier to start? And I think that very much was the core that sort of motivated this framework as we put it together. We did it very much like a standards development effort, reached out to the community, kind of solicited input, did survey validation. And it was really designed with this concept in mind that everybody's busy, everybody's trying to do the right thing, right? If they're in crawl, they're trying to get to walk. If they're in walk, they're trying to get to run. But we have to make it easier to start. uh, I think we all know where we want to collectively end up. We have to figure out how to get started. That really was what we tried to do with this is the cartoon-like simplicity of saying, well, it's an abstraction to look at the universe of people in tech and say there's 14 job families. Well, to some degree of approximation, it's an easy place to start, right? It's a abstraction to say there are only sort of three levels of competency. But again, as an abstraction to say, well, if we start here, 12 months from now, we'll be in a better place, and then 24 months, and eventually we'll go well past what this framework is trying to do. And it's also an abstraction to say, well, this is an industry agnostic, right? And so we really try to say, look, we know the world is complicated, but we have to start. And if you start on the basics, there are ways to agree on a common set of things to use as a jumping off point, and you can add what's missing. If it's industry specific stuff, you can take away stuff that's not relevant. You can combine categories. But like, if I think back to high school, right, it's like nothing's more terrifying than the blank sheet of paper. And so this is really just an attempt at saying, here's something to start with, have your way at it. And that's really what motivated this is, can we make a tool that makes it uh, less, reduces the friction to start? Because I think the collective impetus is we should all start doing more for the people where it's a competence, not a function.
That makes sense. This isn't the first time that people have talked about cybersecurity. It's been around a little bit. So I guess to play kind of a professionally ignorant person, why should I use this framework when the government has a bunch of lists out there, various other organizations have lists out there? What makes this distinct from some some document that, 800-page document that the federal government has provided?
Well, I think it's exactly that. I'll defer to Arun and Jamie as people out in the field, right? But it's got to be easy to start with. And I think that was really what we were trying to aim for here is this is not the be all and end all of every single possible thing you could possibly be doing for every role. This is a way to say, in general, it's hard to figure out how to get started. And so maybe Arun and Jamie, I'll call on you guys, right? Because your organizations live this challenge every single day.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think the 800-page document was really a point taken, right? There are a lot of those documents that come out, and we certainly espouse a lot of the NIST recommendations, which are quite valuable. But I found this framework is something that's very practical for organizations who perhaps haven't thought intently about this, and for individuals that are just getting started. I remember I started as a programmer in the business, and at that time, security was fairly nascent, and we had to learn along the way. I think I would have very much valued something that gave me a quick snapshot of the kinds of things that I need to consider to make the source code secure. And particularly in today's environment, I don't think we can assume that all individuals do know those things, because not everyone wakes up every day, as Krob indicated, thinking about security as their first order mandate. So I think it's very practical, something that we can learn from as an organization, OpenSSF, and we can further stimulate and grow over time.
As an organization, is already challenging to make sure that my folks are trained, they're certified at a certain level, and then new regulations are coming up. The space is changing so dynamically, so rapidly, and should I focus on training my people? Should I focus on figuring out what are the new changes happening and understanding what that skills that they need to be trained in? So I think in that sense, Clyde, as you said, instead of starting from a blank sheet of paper or understanding or parsing that 800-page document and figuring out, this is what it maps to my team, this is where I find this thing very useful. It's a cybersecurity skills framework that is open. It's a starting point. It's not the end point. I can take it, I can customize it for my org, and then potentially, because it's open, a very classic LF way, I can contribute back that, hey, you know what? As I am adapting it for my org, here are the gaps that I'm seeing. Here is how I'm adapting it. Here are the new tracks, new courses, new certifications that I could possibly do and contribute back. And so I'm hoping that as more and more orgs start to look at it, they see it that way as well, that, you know what, I adapted it, I contributed it back. And the other important part is it's not just an Intel problem or an IBM problem or one industry problem. It's a collective problem. Why solve it by yourself? Why be in your own silo and solve it yourself? And that's where, taking it, bring it up to your org, adapting it, contributing it back, always making it better and better, so that it's a collective problem, it's a global problem, let's solve it. And the best way to solve global challenges is using open source, is using open collaboration. I think that's what I would stress upon.
I totally agree. Of course, I work for LF, so I'm a big fan of our open and collaborative nature. This might be a good time. We have a quick demo just so people can get a quick look at it, so they can see some of the openness and the flexibility that's going on. So, Barry, if you would kick that off, I'd appreciate it.
Take a quick look at the Cybersecurity Skills Framework. You can see the URL at the top, which we will also put in the webinar chat. Once you get to this page, simply scroll down to the bottom and see the 3 easy steps. You're going to first review the job families that you would like to include in your framework. Then you can move to adjust the skills and customize it based on your team and your organization. And then you can confirm and export it either in a CSV or JSON file. For this example, we've already selected DevOps Engineer. And from here, you can see example job titles. And then you can expand or collapse the descriptions, the core responsibilities, basic skills, intermediate skills, and advanced skills. Once you've reviewed those, simply hit Next and move to where you can customize. Here you see we're still on DevOps Engineer. The basic skills are listed here, followed by intermediate and advanced. You can click on each one and delete one. You can reset it back to the default, or you can move them. As you see, I've moved from advanced to intermediate. I moved one of the advanced to basic. You simply click on it and move it. Again, you can delete, you can add, and you can rearrange the skills based on the needs of your organization and your team. Once you're happy with the skills for that particular job family, simply hit next. You can name your file and export it again as CSV or JSON. Thank you.
I love that it's so flexible that I can build out exactly what I want in there, arrange it around. So this gives you a list, and you can then import it into any other tool that you may have. And the cybersecurity framework.io is the site. It's out there in the chat if you want to take a look at that. But I have some questions for Jamie and Arun as far as now that I have this list. We've had these kinds of lists, maybe not as great as this one, but one of the questions is, how do you change the culture so that people embrace cybersecurity as part of their job? Because, there's a long history of, well, we have a security team, so I don't have to think about that. It's that person's job over there, so I'll just not look, and then it's not my gig. So how do we use this list and bring it into all of these roles? So it's not just your CISO role. How are you planning on incorporating it, or how are you already incorporating it into kind of everybody's job?
I think as Prov was saying, or maybe we were talking about it, secure like everybody is watching. So security is everybody's job in that sense. I mean, when I saw the demo, it immediately clicks me that, hey, you know what? I can create a custom plan. I can take that CSV, and I was looking at the survey of the number of people that are showing up here. I was hoping there are some HR talent planning folks that would have shown up, because eventually that's the integration point that I see. Because as much as we are required to do compliance, workplace safety, all sorts of trainings on a yearly basis, that's exactly where I see it fitting in right there itself. Essentially taking this CSV or JSON, importing it into your training portal, that, hey, you know what? This is where it's plugged in. Now at Intel, we have this culture of OKR. We're a very OKR driven company. So essentially, without saying that this is a mandatory training based upon your skill level, say, hey, you are an engineer, you are a DevOps engineer, or whatever, you are a chip engineer. So I can start crafting that. Now I've imported the CSV JSON into my HR talent planning tool. Now I can start assigning those skills to the specific engineer and possibly provide integration with workboard. So then in the workboard, because the more you lower the bar for participation and integration in people's existing tools, the higher the likelihood it would be adopted. And the important part is incentivizing it, that, hey, you know what? As a manager, I am asking you this be 10% of your job where you take this training, and I'm going to be assessing you in the quarterly review. So I think building those incentive mechanism, embracing this as part of our existing tools and workflow is going to go a long way, is how at least we are looking at it.
Right.
Yeah, I'll dovetail with that. I mean, I reiterate that I do think this is a team sport. And actually, I think security is actually a very fun team sport for those that don't think it's fun. But I actually think that it's important to marry inspiration of why do you need to do this? Why is it important to the clients, of course, with some sort of defined security policy? And we have that in IBM. It's called Secure by Design. But then how does each in organization within a unit like ours internalize this? And I think this framework gives them a map, if you will, to say, where are my gaps? How do I assess my gaps? What do I need to really focus on as a team to bring my team to the next level of security posture and, get the benefits from it? Because I think a lot of our clients, particularly those in regulated industries, are very, very focused on this. And we're seeing everyday evidence of just increasing map of bad actors, if you will, that we all have to deal with. So I think it's marrying, there's a great outcome here ahead of you if you do the right things as a product team. and how can you do it? I think this is a very practical approach, very practical set of recommendations for teams.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, this actually ties right in well to our next poll question. So if we can have that come up on the screen, I'll read it as people have a chance to fill it out. But what is your biggest barrier to implementing a cybersecurity skills framework, like the one we just have, such as lack of time or resources, unclear which frameworks to use, difficulty mapping skills, low executive buy-in or support, and concern it won't be adopted or maintained over time? So while we give people a chance to click on their particular thing, let's start with the last issue there, that it won't be adopted or maintained, specifically the maintenance part. So Clyde and Krobe, what are the plans so that this framework is updated in a logical, thoughtful manner without necessarily being too dynamic?
Sure, yeah. I mean, a 5-year-old security framework is not, maybe it's a good doorstop, but not much else. And so the commitment we've made is to keep this thing alive, and Krobe is leading the charge. So Krobe, I'll let you talk about the mechanism and the GitHub and just how do we kind of build the intent to build community around this.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The intention for this whole framework and the tool is this is a living artifact for the community to leverage. And we mentioned we're interested in getting your feedback. What did we get right? What are we missing? So there's going to be some standard business things like, oh, there's a punctuation or a typo. So we'll go ahead and address those things pretty quickly. But the plan going forward is that we're going to review the framework probably on an annual basis, kind of taking feedback from the community, from regulators, kind of current trends, and see, do we need to add a new job family, or is there some new skill, AI version 2, or whatever the thing that might come up, the new challenge for us all. And we'll look on integrating those skills into the framework. And then internally, the LF team, we're meeting on a quarterly basis to kind of map out the strategy of how we're going to update this and plan our release schedule for the big framework updates. But then monthly, we're going to be meeting to collaborate on. So now we have this framework and we've given people kind of some guidelines of where to go next. Well, it's great to tell people, like, here's some ideas. Well, it's, I think, even more impactful to say, all right, here's what we'd like you to do, and here's how you can get those experiences and those skills and those artifacts you need. So we're working on identifying both artifacts within the Linux Foundation's education portfolio, artifacts within the OpenSSF, other organizations, like we partner a lot with OWASP and other foundations that kind of focus on a lot of these core skills. So we're going to be looking at identifying content, whether that's a course, express learning, a one-pager, a infographic. We're going to try to find ways to help people take action. Once you understand what your journey is going to be, well, we're going to help point you to the tools that can get you there and give you those experiences, so that as a manager like Arun, like he's going to put these as OKRs for his associates. Well, he now can also help them, saying, hey, here's, I'd like you to learn this, and here's some resources that you can go do that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Oh, the poll results are up, and okay, fairly mixed. So lack of time and resources is the leader. I kind of figured that that's what that would be. At 64%, unclear as 56, and hopefully we're going to make it more clear by the time we finish the webinar. Mapping skills, again, something I hope that we're able to tackle. Low executive buy-in or support is 21%, and of course, concern that effort will be made and it won't be worth it over time. Okay, so those are good, and that kind of gives me more questions to ask Jamie, Arun. The executive buy-in, I was a little surprised by that, because most executives realize the risk. It's there's some movie where it's like, first you pay the mortgage, then you pay the insurance. That's what you always do. So cybersecurity is mostly about risk. Why would you say that as you work with your own organizations, why would you say an executive wouldn't have buy-in, and how have you combated that in your experience?
Yeah, I'll start. I think most executives who have a little bit of a hesitation, it's because they're not as up to speed on the threat vectors and perhaps what the outcomes might be for their business and for their clients. So one of the things we've done is we have a regular outreach to the critical executive team to make sure that they're informed of the latest in cyber threats, as well as what does that mean for the client. And I think it's a very complex, changing landscape, right? It goes from looking at the risk of not adhering to vulnerability patch management schedules. You open yourself up to ransomware and other things that are really prevalent, or allowing just side vector attacks into an organization through that kind of software. And lately, we've seen some of our clients getting even more aggressive in communicating their desired outcomes to us. A great example of that you may have seen is JP Morgan Chase did put an open letter out to their software providers outlining what they expect in the realm of security. I think this type of open letter is actually very helpful in informing all of us of the impacts of security to particular organizations. And awareness, I think, is job number one for a lot of us that are security proponents.
Jimmy, you're absolutely right, because I think more often than not, is the executives who don't have a buy-in is because they are not aware. And I would say security is not your top problem until it is. Then it is the only problem that you want to solve first. So that's a critical element. So I think in that sense, understanding that what are the threat vectors, what are the different elements, where is your software being supplied to, what are their security concerns, are you addressing them? Because ultimately you do want to keep supplying software to them. I mean, like, when the US government, for example, came out with the SBOM mandate, the whole industry kind of started rallying around, like we need to be all aligned with SBOM, and that's because everybody want to provide software. So I think in that sense, Jamie, you called out about the JP Morgan letter. So things like that is only going to elevate the requirement that if you want to work with us, this is what we expect from you. So I think that's an important element. The other important element that I've seen is when the execs start thinking about it, immediately comes to their mind, okay, how I'm gonna operationalize this. You're putting all of these requirements on me, do B1, C2, A4. It's like, where do I find these courses? Where do these exist? Do I go to Udemy? Do you go to Coursera? Do you buy a training company? Do I go to LF training? Where does that tag in? So that operational element is kind of that holds them back as well. So I think in that sense, I would love for C to see, for example, the cybersecurity skills assessment framework provide that next step of implementation for me. And I think in that sense, that will hopefully say, the more you lower the bar, that here's the training, here's a CSV, here is how it embeds into workboard, and now boom, you click on this and you launch the training and you get done, you get a certification, and that immediately shows up as an incentive. So I think that operational mechanism is going to be critical. And then the last point, I think, Clyde, you were talking about crawl, walk, run. As a runner, I will give an analogy here. You want to go fast, and this is an African proverb, not my analogy, but it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go long, go together. So in that sense, bringing the entire industry together, executives like me and Jamie think about this all the time. So in terms of bringing that set of executives together, this is exactly what OpenSSF does a very good job of, bringing those together, raising the awareness among these executives that why this cybersecurity skills assessment framework is relevant and how it maps to their job will really help us kind of gain more adoption.
Oh, no, and as somebody in LF education who helps make this content, yes, we have good content, more coming. But before we talk a lot about the skills, there was a question, and by the way, anybody who wants to type in a question, I'm happy to try to tackle it with the group here. But they made a good, if a little bit unhappy point, that since security is never ending, a lot of people, once they kind of get the stamp of approval, like my software package got approved for now. how is it that you're going to keep this going? So do you go back and look at the software again? Who's going to be responsible for that? What are since there's an expense in it, it's time, it's effort, somebody has to know the software, know the code. How is that going to be something that you'd use this framework to help tackle? Because it's a common issue. Like once I'm done with it, I set it down and I'll never look at it again until something bad happens. So how would you plan on using this framework to address the issues with completed software packages and tools that are already done?
I might take a start at that, Tim. And this is back to the abstraction that is the sort of three levels. Part of what happens if you look through those is the further that are right you go with the experience level, you get this shift in focus from what the specific thing is to what are the policies, what are the procedures, how am I evaluating my programs, right? So there is this dynamic sense of continuous development, continuous improvement, and particularly as you get more senior in your organization. And I think the other element is collective risk. I love Anur's analogy, right? I think this is not a insert industry name here challenge, right? When JP does its letter, that is a supplier base that is supplying probably the vast majority of the large companies on earth, right? And so there is an element of collective action. There's an element, frankly, of risk reduction and safety in numbers, right? To be sort of using a common framework for a common story. I think one of the things we haven't touched on, I think Jamie mentioned it earlier quickly, was the regulatory aspect, right? In the absence of more collective action, you're going to get more regulation. And I think we've already seen what that looks like with privacy, which is maybe a little bit further down the track. It's not a happy outcome if you end up with 12 sets of global frameworks trying to impose requirements, right? And so there's an element of collective action as practitioners to try to get a little bit ahead of that to show that we're being mature in our approach here.
Yeah, and I'll chime in because I think there's a lot of DevOps pipeline practitioners on this call in particular. And I think one of the maturity elements of that is looking at the automation vectors that you can apply to the DevOps pipeline, because that is really, really critical in securing the software. We, for instance, are using on continual basis about 6 or 7 different scanning technologies. And that informs us of where things are in the code, if we should find attack vectors on particular open source modules, as an example, and or understanding where we are from a vulnerability perspective. And you're never going to survive a high velocity software delivery without automation and, of course, AI as we mature the AI technologies.
I think another equally important part is, once you deliver the software, the job is not done until even one person is using that software externally, because that software component is most likely built up with a lot of other software components, which is not in your control. And at some point of time, if there is a vulnerability that shows up in that software product, that external product that you don't have a control of, then your DevOps need to kick in. Then you need to kind of release the software again, make sure the vulnerability is patched up. Otherwise, the customer is going to stop using the software. So I think in that sense, this is where having that later skills, that say you release the software 3 years ago and the vulnerability is found now, that's where you may not have kept up to latest cybersecurity skills, but this is where the framework will help. So if you're training yourself, if you are amping up yourself constantly, then you can quickly say, aha, these are the new tools, this is the new assessment that I need to do, and still make sure your software is relevant for your customers. So if you want to sell software, you got to keep your skills up to date.
Absolutely. And there's some rules and regulations coming out of Europe about if you produce software, you are responsible for it for a long time. So I think this will be changing. We have another poll question coming up. So if we can pop that on the screen. So when developers need cybersecurity skills development, where do they typically go? So either internal training or corporate learning portal, external courses or certifications, open source communities or GitHub, peer-to-peer or on the job learning, or not sure. So while people are answering that, we had a question from the audience. In the world of AI replacing many jobs like developers, DevOps, QA, and so forth, how does this framework hold or be relevant? So, quick changing world with AI, is this framework going to keep up, and is it even needed? Who wants to
Yeah,
take?
it's a great question. I think it's one on lots of people's minds. And obviously, Crow talked about the development cycle that we're on in terms of reviewing. I think one of the critical elements, so if you think about the mechanics of how the AI systems work, is they're trained on the data from the past. And the old aphorism that it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. Most attacks that are novel, that are really damaging, aren't based on patterns from the past. And at least the current generation of AI isn't good at extrapolating and imagining what might happen next. That's where the humans are really good, right? I mean, I had one land in my inbox last week. I was on vacation, I was on my phone, and it's click here to sign the DocuSign. And as I was doing it, I was like, oh, hold on, this is not right. But the creativity with which the attacks are coming almost requires this sort of human element in terms of imagining what could be the sort of threat modeling. AI is great at the processing what we've seen in the past and maybe sort of gentle extrapolations. It's not great at, hey, it's about the time of month for mobile phone bills, and so I got this Verizon message that looks right. It's not good at inferring the new attack surfaces, and ultimately, that's going to have people are going to be important, right, in terms of evaluating. The machines are good at some stuff. They're not good at the future-looking imagination of what bad thing might be trying to happen under the radar here that hasn't been in the literature I've been trained on.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I think we have the results available. So 7% said internal or corporate learning portal. Interesting. 37 is external course of certification. 18 is open source communities, GitHub. 13% was peer-to-peer and on the job. And then 25% were not sure. Well, that's some very interesting kind of output. As somebody who works in the education area, I like that there was a lot of people going to external sources, us, if you want. We do have an aggressive plan. We already started. We have people that are dedicated to cybersecurity curriculum. We have a threat modeling course that's quite popular, so I'm of course a fan of that. But that's my perspective, since I'm somebody who makes content. So for Jamie, Arun, or Clyde, even as you look to how am I going to meet these? Now I know what the issues are. What's your process of finding the curriculum and making sure that your people are being properly skilled and it's at least the education is available, whether or not they take advantage?
Yeah, Arun touched upon this earlier. We do have a certification process that everybody has to go through annually, but that's not going to be enough. So we do encourage them to do self-study, whether that's internal resources that we provide, and we very much are a proponent of the Linux Foundation educational resources and pointing our communities to those resources. I think this is a great opportunity for us, as we've all said before, to collaborate on something that's very evolving. It needs to be agile, and it needs to serve the industry because the industry in terms of what we're talking about here is very entangled. We're all open source consumers, and we're all networked and integrated into each other's applications, etc., given how our clients use the technology. So I think this collaboration is really, really important.
I would like to see places like Coursera, Udemy. I mean, LF Training, of course, will adapt this cybersecurity skills assessment framework and say, here is a framework and here is a corresponding LF training. But I want this to be like a standard that could be adopted across all training sites, where then what I can do as a company, I can say, okay, I agree upon the framework. The implementation behind the scene doesn't matter. And it kind of goes back to, if you think about Kubernetes is a standard. Now you could run like a Amazon version of Kubernetes, Google version of Kubernetes, or Microsoft version of Kubernetes. At least there is a standard. So I would like to see something similar where Coursera, Udemy, all these popular training sites, in addition to LF training, say, hey, come to us. We align ourselves with this cybersecurity skills assessment framework. If you want to do B1, we have exactly mapped out what your B1 journey could look like. Or if you want to take the intermediate track, here is the exact intermediate track that we have created for you that aligns with the cyber skills assessment framework. So I think things like those would only make this framework that much more relevant. And maybe that's where I would like to see the direction heading into.
I appreciate that, Arun. I think that's exactly the intent here, right? Was the reason we've published this as what is effectively an open standard is to make it as easy as possible for suppliers, for in-house or talent development organizations to arrange. A lot of assets exist already, and some of them could be formal training assets, some of them could be lunch and learns, right? You could have a variety. But this idea of sort of mapping it back, because part of the value of this is the checklist effect, right? Of like, okay, have I thought about this? And how do I instantiate this in my particular audience for this particular level? And so the mental discipline, this has become big in the medical field, right? Is experience and training is great. Checklists are useful because it probes your thinking, right? And so I think that as an element of challenging organizations to kind of think about, okay, what do I have? How do I address this? How do I use this? Internal resources, external resources, partner resources from a Coursera or Udemy, free resources that LF or OpenSSF makes available, and you craft your own answer. But mentally have an answer to how did I deal with this particular element, because I should be dealing with it. How formally I deal with it, whether it's on an OKR, that's a decision that you need to make at an organization, at a departmental level, even, right? So it's not trying to be too prescriptive, but it is trying to be that annoying voice in your head say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this for this audience, for this seniority level?
I think it's very important. I heard somewhere where it says having agency over your intention is super important.
Right.
And I think what you're doing is you're making it very explicit and deliberate attempt at have you thought about it, because otherwise, your attention gets diverted to 99 other things that you're focusing on, and this gets left out, and then this becomes the most important problem for you.
And touching on, we talked about the maintenance of this framework. We've already started to work with our partners over in LF Education. Glenn is one of our deepest partners. He's the author of the Security Knowledge Framework, and he's actively working on creating lab material for all the level 1 skills so that people learn things differently. Some people are visual, some are tactile, some are oral. So we're looking at trying to find methods to touch on all of those different learning types. And, Glenn's focused in on the hands-on keyboard. I need a lab to understand how to avoid, how I do input validation or avoid a cross-site scripting problem. And then on our side, Dr. David Wheeler's gone through and we did just looking at the LF and OpenSSF courses. Out of the gate, we have about 30% coverage for all of the level 1, the beginner skills that exist today. And I think almost all of that is free content. And we're going through and doing the gap assessment, understanding, all right, so we have a class, or we might have a concise guide. That's kind of our deal at the OpenSSF. We do a lot of 1 or 2 page concise guides of how to write or pick secure software. So we're going to be identifying these other assets. So again, depending on how you learn or what your role is, we're going to, we might point you to a class in the LF ecosystem. We might fob something over to ISC2 or SANS potentially. But we're going to try to identify where these useful artifacts are, get them aligned with the framework so that as somebody's assembling their journey through the tool, they'll be able to have that kind of that checklist manifesto style interface. Like, oh, I see I've got 2 LF course options. I've got these other external things, or there's a really great authoritative book, point to the ShowStack book on threat modeling, for example, in addition to the LF threat modeling class.
Absolutely. And then that leads to one of the questions. We have a little bit of time for Q&A here, so they're starting to roll in. But somebody asked, can we learn the various skills without spending any money? And the answer is yes, of course. At the Linux Foundation in Education, we have a lot of free resources. So we have e-learning, just longer courses. We have 50 of them that are already available in various topics. But specifically for this framework, Crow mentioned this guy, Glenn Tenkate. And he and some of the other people on my team, we are mapping this, B1 was mentioned. You'll notice if you go in there, there's some letters and numbers associated with it. But I would say probably at least a third, we'll probably end up with 400 or so different bits of curriculum. At least a third of it will be free. So because we want you to be secure, everybody is happy when your software is secure. It makes me happy as a consumer of that software. If it shows up on my phone or my laptop, I like it when it's secure. This is a good thing. And then, of course, if you are somebody that provides it, you like when it's secure because your hassle factor goes down. There's lots of good reasons. But yes, you can do this all free. It helps if somebody like me spends their nights and weekends curating the information for you. So sometimes it's free, sometimes it's paid, and that's, kind of a service like, oh, thanks for doing all that research. But you could learn all of these things without having to pay. It's just going to take you some time to do that. Now, there's some people, some of the other questions that we can kind of tackle and get to. Somebody mentioned a very large organization, like 10,000 employees. Some of you would be familiar with what that's like. How do you really make sure that everybody, as Krobit said earlier, from the janitor to the CEO, how are you going to ensure that they are kind of living up to it? They don't just go through something, click through it, so to speak, and then otherwise forget it for the year until it comes up again.
Well, I mentioned this earlier. Our certification process also includes a test, so you can't get through it by just reading the material. You have to take a little test and kind of test your skills. But more importantly, it's reiterating again something that Crow and Clyde mentioned are those other resources, right? What other resources do you really need to go and investigate and understand to really do the best at your job, to be the best steward for IBM, if you will, on the topic of security, because it's a team sport. We need everybody to be a part of the team. And so just reiterating that, I think it's basic, but it's really important.
Yeah, I think very similar at Intel as well. We take all sorts of trainings, mandatory corporate required trainings, and this should be really just part of that. And pretty much at end of the training, you can say that, okay, I need to take the test to get that certification. And more often than not, you have to kind of figure out that, aha, you know what, I got 80% right, but I didn't get these two sections right. Then you go back and review those sections. So you truly grasp those fundamentals of the intended course. And usually next year they would say, hey, you can opt out if you are fully aware of the course material yet, but if not, then you can take the course all over again. Particularly with the AI, with the speed with which AI is moving and how attackers are finding new threat vectors, I expect this course to be probably done more regularly rather, right? Because you want to keep your product secure and be used more actively.
Well,
Yeah, I think picking up on this idea of the implementation and the incentives, and somebody had a question in there about the incentives. Uh, you know, if I jump in my time machine and go forward a couple of years, I would love for this collective action to be, the example I like to point out to is almost every electrical appliance, when it comes, has a little tag down by the plug that has an underwriter's laboratory certification on it. Most of us have no idea why that's there. That was a standard to prevent these things catching fire. And and we've done it for so long that nothing catches fire anymore. But if you didn't see that UL, you'd be worried. I think part of what this framework is trying to get to is this common language of, hey, do you UL? Do you cyber framework? And so the part of the pressure on executives and leaders, if more people start asking the question of, hey, do you use that baseline framework? It creates this, oh, well, I see IBM using it, I see Intel using it. Like, I can't be the guy that can't answer in the affirmative, right? And so there's an element of holding each other accountable to drive the alignment of incentives, especially up and down the food chain, that this is something we need to do. Or we can wait for regulators to come do it, which I don't think is a happy outcome for any of us, right? So I think the more that collectively as practitioners, we hold ourselves accountable. This is trying to provide a simple language framework for being able to say, hey, I use that as my baseline, right? That's my UL sort of equivalent. Yeah. If that time machine takes me to that future, I'd be really, really happy that we've gotten to a place where we're all collectively trying to do the right things.
Okay, well, we have about 5 minutes left. So I think we now, after listening to this, we all know that whether we're, entry level or an executive, we have to be paying attention to cybersecurity. We need to embrace this. We can't just kind of look the other way anymore. So let me ask each one of you some advice. So if you had one piece of advice for another organization that was trying to understand this challenge in the implementation of the framework, what would it be? So Jamie, let's start with you. What would be your one piece of advice for others?
My piece of advice is understanding security and doing a great job with it is a competitive advantage. So understand what that means to you and take advantage of it in any way that makes sense for your organization.
Okay. Krob, how about you?
I'll have two pieces of advice to dovetail in what Jamie said. If you have these skills and you can demonstrate you have these, you are proving your worth to the business and your team. You are a more valuable associate if you can show that you are thinking about these things and doing it. And so, learning these skills, plotting a course for yourself, and so this self-improvement is critical for your long-term careers. And then to another way you can get some of these skills, in addition to the, a learning, you're taking a class or you're reading a white paper, you find a community where you can, of like-minded individuals that you can help work with and network and find a mentor that can help coach you and give you some of these experiences and help, broker these relationships to some of these resources.
Sounds good. Arun, how about you?
To me, really, security comes down to customer obsession. If you care about your product to be used by customers and come back to you again and again and build that confidence and trust into you, you need to make sure you keep your product secure. And failure is inevitable, right? How do you recover from that very quickly and showing that, hey, you had all the right skills, you did all the procedures, being very transparent about it, that we followed all the guidelines, and this is a brand new threat vector, but we are ready to jump onto it as soon as it occurs and then be able to fix it. I think it really goes a long way.
That makes sense. Clyde, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say ditto to what the other panelists have said, and I would add for those folks who are a little bit of a movie buffs, if you remember the famous line from Fight Club, that the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. This is the opposite of that. We all need to be talking more about why this is important, not just as a function, but also as a competency in all these different roles that day to day don't think about it because the release schedule to meet the event rollout for next week is breathing down our neck. The more we collectively talk about this is an important thing that we should all be accountable for, the more it normalizes the expectation that it is something we do.
That makes sense.
So
Well,
the first rule of cyber is keep talking about cyber.
first rule is there's another T-shirt right there. First rule of cyber is keep talking about cyber. I love it. I love it. Well, our time is coming to an end, so I want to really thank all of the panelists for being here and sharing your experience, your knowledge with us. I've learned a lot this hour, and hopefully we'll have a chance to see you guys again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much to our speakers for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. Just a quick reminder that this recording will be on the Linux Foundation's YouTube page later today. We hope you join us for future webinars. Have a wonderful day.